Hi guys, welcome to Stout Sport Performance. In today's video, we're going to be talking about the primary ways that we're going to think about measuring our progression as we move through training programs designed not just for athletic performance, but also for adult performance, for health and longevity. Now, what we're going to think about here are some basic methods. The first is going to be thinking about the degree of our resistance that we're using in a given exercise. We're going to think about the number of repetitions that we're performing with given exercises. We're going to think about our movement execution, and we can also think about the velocity at which we are moving. Now, for most people, especially the people that are training online with us, we're going to stay in those movement execution, relative resistance, and number of repetition ranges. Now, if there's some people that are training specifically with us, we might think about trying to find ways to measure the velocity of certain movements to measure progression in that way. But essentially what we're going to do is we're going to think about our progression like this. If we can perform an exercise with a given resistance, let's say we're performing gauntlet squats with 10 kilos and we perform 8 repetition sets one week, and the next week we come back, we're going to try to add at least 2 repetitions to that same exercise. So if we can perform 10 repetition sets with that same weight, that 10 kilo weight, then we know that we're making progress. One of the things that we could also do is maintain the same number of repetitions, but then increase the weight that we're using. So instead of using 10 kilos, we might use 11 or 12.5 kilos, and we perform that same set of 8 repetitions, and we know that we have progressed and improved as well because we've lifted more weight for the same number of repetitions. So sometimes what you'll see, for example, is we give you a rep range. We say perform 8 to 12 repetitions. And the reason that we do this is because we give you some leeway. So for example, if you have the feeling you're performing with amazing exercise quality at a given resistance and you want to stay at that resistance, then we're going to challenge you to try to perform up to that end scale of reps that we've set for you. And if you reach that and you can perform, for example, 3 sets of 12 repetitions with a given weight, then you know it's time to progress and add additional resistance and then bring those reps back down and try to work back up that scale. It's a really easy way to think about trying to progress. Now, one of the other things that we can do when it comes to progression is think about the ways in which that we're forcing you to perform certain exercises. Now, there's a list of different ways that we can do this, and we're not going to get into the specifics about how we can do that in this video, but we want to make you aware of them. So if there's times at which you feel like maybe I'm not progressing, you can look within your training and see we've made that more difficult by the way we've performed it. So for example, if we're performing normal push-ups, what we might be able to do is add in an isometric pause at the bottom of that push-up. That will undoubtedly make the exercise harder and make you have to spend time in a really mechanically disadvantaged position. So we can use different types of eccentric, concentric, and isometric tempos to challenge your ability to perform certain exercises. One of the things that we can also do is we can think about making the stability demands on you more difficult. Think about performing a squat with 2 legs and then performing a squat with 1 leg. You'll be able to use a lot less resistance in the squat with 1 leg, but you'll be responsible for a lot more of the stability that's needed to be able to perform this exercise with high quality. So we're progressing in regards to our ability to stabilize. We're making the stability demands of the exercises relatively more difficult. And one of the last things that we can do is we can think about changing where your attention is located and focused. Now, this is really important if you're an athlete, for example, because at the beginning of learning movements and exercises, we're focused internally only. We're thinking about moving through a certain range of motion, a certain exercise, by being aware of all the different parts of our body. There's an internal focus that we place. Now, to the point where we develop a quality movement pattern, what we might be able to do is we might be able to add in an external object that we have to react to. So for example, if we're working on performing some different type of reactive movements, instead of just focusing on the quality of your movement, we're forcing you to focus on, for example, catching a ball. So your focus can't be on your movement because you have to focus on where this ball is moving. So we've made the exercise and movement more difficult by changing the way you have to approach that movement pattern. Your focus is now external, away from you, instead of being internally placed. And that's really important in sport because obviously you don't have time to be thinking about how you're moving. You have to think about your competitors, the people you're playing against, and also the things that you need to be able to do to perform well within that sporting event. But I also think that's important in life. We can't be thinking about how we're moving all the time. We got to build habits that stay with us as we think about movement quality. And the last thing that we can do, and we do occasionally here, is we think about tempo of our movements. Now we can think about this in a qualitative measure. For example, a lot of times the first time somebody does a kettlebell swing, we don't see that typical power-based feeling to the exercise. And then as we get some good feeling with that, we can see the hips moving much faster. And that's just with the eyes. There's a qualitative feeling and look to being able to move faster through certain movements. But if you're an athlete, one of the other things we can do is we can measure the velocity of certain movements. So we can actually see if you're getting stronger, moving for the same number of repetitions, moving different resistances at a faster speed than you have normally done them. That's also a way that we can measure progression. So this is just some of the ways that we can think about measuring progression. You should be aware of them as you do your training. It's going to be easier for you to track and see your improvement over time, which is not just motivating, but also important to make sure that you're on a quality training plan for you. Increasing our load, thinking about movement execution, moving faster, or performing extra repetitions.